It's time for the whole 9 yards. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ralph Ventre, fired up and ready to go for week 6 of the FCS football season. St. Francis and Robert Morris are on a bye. 7 NEC teams are in action, all on Saturday. 2 Northeast Conference games. Merrimack hosting an NEC team. Our game of the week, a lot to get to. Let's kick it off with our opening drive. We'll begin in North Andover, Massachusetts. Bryant is the visitor, and the Bulldogs will be taking on a stingy defense for the second week in a row. Merrimack is back at home this week. Last week, they took their MAC tough defense on the road against Lehigh and performed remarkably well. 4 interceptions limited Lehigh to just 9 first downs in the game, and the run defense held the opponent to only 2.6 yards per carry. Yes, I know it's not that time yet, but stats amazing. Bryant, on the other hand, managed only 210 yards in last week's game against a stout St. Francis defense. The Bulldogs averaged only 3 yards per play in the 16-6 defeat, but the Corey Curtis to Vincent Nitzavacchia connection was a threat once again. 8 completions to Nitzavacchia, including a beautifully placed touchdown pass early on to give the Bulldogs an advantage. Now, Merrimack quarterback Christian Carter has a reliable target as well. That would be none other than reigning NEC Offensive Co-Player of the Week, Marquise Spence. Spence went off last week at Lehigh. 16 catches, that's tied for the most in the FCS this season. 175 yards. He has great chemistry with his quarterback. He's a reliable and versatile target. He is someone that the Bryant defense has to game plan for on Saturday. Spence, Nitzavacchia, Warriors, Bulldogs. You'll see it live on NEC Front Row. Moving down the docket to an intriguing conference matchup where East meets West, Duquesne will be at home for the first time in the last 4 weeks. It'll be the NEC opener for the Dukes. Now, a minor injury has kept All-American running back A.J. Hines on the sidelines for the last 2 games. A possibility Duquesne could have him back in action on Rooney Field this Saturday. But as for last week against UNH, the Duquesne offense was bottled up, had its lowest output of the season thus far. They'll look to rebound against an LIU team that is 0-2 in NEC play. The Sharks dropped the opener to Sacred Heart. Then they fell 24-14 last week at Wagner. Now, although they are 0-2 against NEC opponents, LIU has played some physical football in those games, especially on the defensive front. Plenty of playmakers up front for the Sharks, and they limited Wagner to only 41 rush yards in last week's setback. So you better believe that the battle at the line of scrimmage is a key in this one when Duquesne hosts LIU live on NEC Front Row. Stepping out of conference for a minute here, the Outer Bridge rivalry is back. It'll be the 25th meeting between local rivals Monmouth and Wagner. These teams, of course, met on an annual basis when Monmouth was a Northeast Conference member up until 2012. As for this year's battle between the Jersey Shore and Staten Island, it'll unfold up on Grimes Hill, where Wagner has a little bit of momentum following last week's win over LIU. The Seahawks' front seven was stifling in that victory over LIU. They limited the Sharks to only 201 yards of total offense, and they combined for 10 tackles for loss. 10 hits behind the line of scrimmage from Tavon Grant, Cam Gill, Chris Williams, and Santoni Graham. Now that group will have to contain a talented Monmouth attack this Saturday. The Hawks are coming off a bye week. Of course, last year, we remember the fireworks down at the Jersey Shore. Wagner with a 47-32 lead in the fourth quarter. Monmouth stormed back. A dramatic last-minute touchdown by Reggie White. The Hawks won a shootout, 54-47. In that game, however, the aforementioned Santoni Graham and Cam Gill had themselves a day. The Seahawks forced 4 turnovers on the road. I'm sure they'll like to treat the home crowd to some takeaways this Saturday at Hamline Field. It'll be under the lights, 6 p.m. kickoff. Old friend Monmouth is in town to take on Wagner. It's our last segment of the opening drive, and it's our featured NEC Game of the Week on ESPN3. The Nutmeg State rivalry game, Central Connecticut visiting Sacred Heart. 2 3-1 teams, both coming off a bye week. Both teams have been getting it done offensively in the first part of the season. Balance on both offenses as well. We'll start with Sacred Heart, where quarterback Logan Marchie is leading the NEC with more than 300 pass yards per game. Now, Marchie over 300 in the passing game. Julius Chestnut with more than 100 rush yards per game for the Pioneers. Heading into the bye week, Chestnut ranked second overall amongst FCS leaders in rush yards. Now, Sacred Heart had the number 1 rushing attack in the Northeast Conference last year. Right now, they own the conference's top passing attack. Now we'll flip it over to the other side, where Central Connecticut has done quite well for itself when it comes to moving the football, and that's because of a dual-threat quarterback and a dual-threat wide receiver. Quarterback Aaron Winchester, in his first season as the starter after transferring from Georgia State, well, he has at least 1 passing touchdown in all 4 appearances this year, and he happens to be the Blue Devils' second leading rusher. On the outside, it's Tyshawn James. The receiver has really come into his own lately. He has 7 total touchdowns this season, 3 on the ground, 4 on receptions. CCSU with the number 1 rushing offense in the NEC at 6.4 yards per carry. We'll have more about these 2 offenses later in the show. There promises to be plenty of offense at Campus Field on Saturday, or just maybe the defenses will have something to say about that. You can only find out if you tune in to ESPN3 live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. CCSU, Sacred Heart, Paul Dottino, Jeff Fiegels, John Schmelk on the call. Time to fire up that ESPN app. Let's check in on the NEC stock market. I'll tell you whose value is all the way up. Moving the markets this week, it's Bryant Jr. running back Isaac McCray. Now, you may remember him for a strong start to the 2017 season. He had a 100-yard game against Fordham. He had a great showing against UNH, but then he had to shut it down due to illness. His rookie campaign cut short. 2018, he's back in Smithfield, but again, in and out of the lineup due to injury. When he's been on the field, though, he has shown the ability to make things happen. Isaac McCray missed the first 3 games of this season, but it appears he has gotten back on track. He scored a touchdown in his season debut, a Week 4 game against Brown, and then in Week 5 against St. Francis, he tallied 126 yards from scrimmage, more than 60 on the ground, 65 through the air. Isaac McCray appears to be healthy again. He is flashing big playability, and he certainly has the bloodlines. Yes, Isaac's brother, Rico McCray, the 2015 NEC Offensive Player of the Year for the Bryant Bulldogs. Now it's the younger brother's turn, and there is no doubt that Isaac McCray's stock is on the way up. I'm taking the Twitter time out. Time to look at the tweet sheet. We have one this week from Coach A. Jenkins. That's Adam Jenkins, the associate head coach under Ryan McCarthy at CCSU. And he lays out the reasons why the NEC Game of the Week is must-see material. Both teams have had strong out-of-conference showings. Bragging rights are at stake, as always in this annual Nutmeg State rivalry game. Not to mention, these two teams played an instant classic last year in New Britain. It was decided in the final seconds. Sacred Heart prevailed. It wound up being an important victory for the Pioneers, who went on to share the 2018 NEC title with Duquesne. So CCSU and Sacred Heart, they were picked near the top of the preseason poll. They've had great non-conference showings, and they're ready to go after it in the NEC Game of the Week on ESPN3. I'm excited, and Coach Adam Jenkins is too. That's amazing, bruh. Well, what has me in a state of amazement this week? Well, it's the offensive production from Central Connecticut and Sacred Heart through the first 4 games of the season. These two teams square off in the featured matchup of the week, and they are both averaging more than 410 yards per outing. The top 2 offenses in the Northeast Conference doing well on a national scale, too. CCSU averaging more than 7.1 yards per play. That's 7th highest in the entire FCS. Sacred Heart gains 6.4 yards per play. That's 24th overall in the nation. Both teams combining for nearly 900 yards of offense per game. Both teams ranked in the national top 25 in terms of yards per play, and stats amazing. It's always good to check in with Rick Saratella of NFL Draft Bible. I certainly enjoy it. I hope you do too, because here is another edition of the NEC Football Chop Shop. We're back in the NEC Football Chop Shop. Ralph Ventre, Rick Saratella on the line. Rick, of course, with NFL Draft Bible, also an advanced scout for the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. 7 NEC teams in action on the Week 6 schedule. What game are you honing in on this week?
Well, earlier on in the season, you asked me, Ralph, who's a dark horse for the conference, and the Wagner Seahawks were my selection. And we talked about the CAS Express I really think he may have jolted this team, and they've got a big-time matchup this week here with recruiting implications as Monmouth comes to Wagner, battle of the tri-state area, and I got news for you. This Wagner defense now is something else. We talked about the CAS Express. How about their linebacker, Tavon Grant? All he did last week, 9 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, 2.5 sacks, a forced fumble, kind of a coming out party for this man, playing opposite of Cam Gill, who gets all the publicity and notoriety, and deservedly so. But Tavon Grant, another one of these senior players for that Wagner defense, kind of in the shadow, busting out in a big way last week. And then, oh, by the way, Chris Williams, also a top standout performer from a week ago, 5 tackles, 2 sacks. The big man is showing some agility. He is on the NFL PA Bowl radar as well. And then another guy, kind of an unsung hero that doesn't get the credit either, Santonio Graham. This guy is, just dedicated to the weight room, dedicated to the Wagner raves about his work ethic. Wagner raves about his work ethic, his intensity. He's averaging over 7 tackles a game. And then one other guy on offense I'll throw out there, I'm waiting for him to bust out, Adam Giordano. Big, tall, lengthy tight end, has the look of an NFL tight end, has the athleticism to go along with it, Ralph. He just hasn't put it all together and busted out yet, but I think his time is coming as well.
So now, in terms of Northeast Conference games in Week 6, I know there's a pretty interesting battle brewing in the state of Connecticut that has piqued your interest, Rick.
Yeah, I'm looking ahead at the Central Connecticut and Sacred Heart matchup. Obviously, Sacred Heart 1-0 in the conference. Central Connecticut yet to play a conference game, but both teams 3-1. Both teams very invested in the football programs. I would say within the conference, these two put as much resources into their football programs as anyone. CCSU, they've really gotten behind the football program. You've seen them make strides. Sacred Heart, of course, Bobby Valentine, the new athletic director, upgrading the facilities. So both of these programs on the uprise. I will say, Ryan McCarthy has done a phenomenal job stepping in for Coach Rosamato, and they've got these 2 playmakers, one on each side of the ball, Tyshawn James and Trey Jones. We've talked about each guy in the past. Sacred Heart now, we talked about Mark Nofri earlier in the season. This man does more with less. It seems like year in and year out, the second longest tenured head coach. He's taken a transfer quarterback in Logan Marchie, who we've discussed a couple of times already. He's got a freshman wide receiver, Tyrese Chambers out of Baltimore, making plays all over the field, 5 receiving touchdowns, nearly 400 yards receiving. And then a sophomore running back, Julius Chestnut. How about that? The guy's averaging 5.5 yards per clip, over 400 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns coming around. So I really think that Sacred Heart right now, when you take a look around the conference, that 3-headed monster is as good as any trio in the conference. This is going to be a heck of a showdown. It's going to be a jam-packed crowd, a riled-up crowd. So we're ready and looking forward to it.
Yeah, 2 local rivals, and the stakes are always a lot higher when a conference victory is on the line. So Central, Sacred Heart, that's actually the NEC Game of the Week on ESPN3. I'm sure Rick will be checking in on that one from time to time. I'll be in the house up in Fairfield, Connecticut. But for now, that's all we got in the Week 6 Chop Shop. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ralph, he's Rick, and we'll see you again next week. Now that we've chopped it up with Rick, that'll do it for this week's show. 3 games on NEC Front Row this Saturday. The NEC Game of the Week, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, ESPN3, CCSU at Sacred Heart. We'll be back next week to talk about the aftermath. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm Ralph Ventre. This is the Whole 9 Yards.